Velocity. To begin, let's talk a little about the differences in velocity and capacity. Velocity is the total amount of work that we complete by the end of the sprint. From a metrics perspective, we were less concerned about the work we didn't complete. From a velocity perspective, we're more concerned about what we did complete. Of course, what we didn't get done is important information and will be used. We're going to talk a little bit about metrics and how we use them to compare our predictability. If your planning allowed for 100 points, and your completion rate was only 50 points, this relates directly to your predictability. Velocity is the total number of story points that you complete at the end of the sprint, i.e., for a specific sprint. Velocity is also used for forecasting purposes. When we look at capacity conversation, we see that the capacity is the amount of hours, the available time you have to actually do the work. Your capacity is naturally going to go up and down every single sprint. It's never going to be, or rarely going to be, consistent. Such things as holidays, meetings, and training sessions will cause capacity to fluctuate as these kinds of things get in the way of producing work. Capacity has a very significant impact obviously on your velocity. The fewer hours you have available, the less work you're likely going to produce, so very close relationship between the two. It's not necessarily a direct relationship. As you improve, you'll be able to produce more stuff in less time. The idea is less time available, less output. That's how that works. Since your capacity goes up and down naturally, and other things get in your way too, like impediments, decisions not being made, all kinds of things, like maybe you're not feeling well. For whatever reason, if you're not having a good day, then your output is going to go down. We have to remember we're dealing with human beings, not machines. Human beings are variables, and their outputs are variable based on moods and many other things affecting their lives. Therefore, our velocity will go up and down naturally based on a number of factors. Now, since velocity is not by itself a stable number, we need to have a way of stabilizing it so it can be used for forecasting. If our velocity is all over the place, then obviously that's a problem which needs to be stabilized. To do this, we average our velocity across multiple sprints. We're looking for the trend of your velocity, not the specific velocity for a given sprint. We tend not to get too concerned about an individual data point because it's just information. We look at the trend of our data, the trend of our velocity, and other metrics as well to see, are we improving or are we getting worse? Always use your metrics and data to strive for improvement. That's what you're looking to try to accomplish. With velocity, we average it out across multiple sprints and that tends to stabilize it. As previously mentioned, there are still going to be times like the holidays where statistically it's just anomalous. During the holiday seasons, you're barely getting anything out. Therefore, we tend to ignore those, just drop them from our velocity calculations. Returning to the capacity discussion, capacity does have a very significant impact on your velocity. Most teams, most people are very optimistic, overly optimistic, and feel that they can get a lot more done than they actually can. To fully understand capacity, you need to plan for reality, not hopes, dreams, desires, and rainbows. We want to plan based on reality, and capacity planning helps us get there. Capacity planning is a pretty straightforward process. However, I encourage teams that are brand new to perform capacity planning for their first 3 or 4 sprints, whatever you feel is appropriate for that team. After a few times of going through the capacity planning process, they won't need to do it anymore. They'll have a better understanding of what reality means for them and they can just use velocity for their planning. But in the early days, use capacity planning. The way the capacity planning works is pretty simple. It typically takes a few minutes during your sprint planning session and you can shorten that by doing some pre-work. The first thing is that we start out by planning. What we're trying to do is get the available hours in the sprint. We start out by planning 6 hours a day, not 8 hours a day. The reason that we do that is because on average about 2 hours a day are taken up by other things like getting coffee, answering emails, taking phone calls, doing all those things that you do in a day that take you away from working on the items on your backlog. We're trying to determine how much time you have available in a given day to work on items in the backlog. That doesn't mean you're not working during those 2 hours, it just means that you're not doing things related to your backlog. Consider if you're doing a 2-week sprint, working 6 hours a day toward backlog items, then you want to factor in the number of days and every person on the team working those same hours. Say for example 10 days every person on the team working 6 hours unless they're split across multiple teams. This will need to be factored in as well. We'll have approximately 60 hours every sprint to start, which will be our baseline per sprint.